So good morning or good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you all on behalf of the UNFPA in Belarus and Ukraine. This is our second online meeting dedicated to exchange of experience. We speak about the victims of domestic violence and how to contract this phenomenon. So today's meeting, this is the second meeting in our cycle of series of meetings, and I will be the moderator. And I'll be the moderator of this meeting today. So this meeting will be moderated by me, Olga Lukashkova. I'm the coordinator of program activity of UNFPA in Belarus, and my colleague Olesya Kompanets. She is the coordinator of program on preventing and countering domestic violence and GBV of UNFPA in Ukraine. So, Olesya. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Olesya. Good afternoon, Olga. Good afternoon, colleagues and everyone who's listening to us today. You are all warmly welcomed. And I do agree with Olga. I do hope that, yes, this is the second meeting. I do hope it will be productive and useful for everyone. You'll get some information for everyone who's listening. And after the meeting, when we recorded. So, thank you, Olesya. And this meeting is dedicated to Romanian experience. So we'll take Romanian experience in countering the domestic violence and GBV, an organization of support provided to victims, taking into consideration that we have the COVID situation right now in the world. So today's expert that will present the Romanian experience, Ionela Horca. She is a representative of the Eastern European Institute of Reproductive Health. But before we actually come to a conversation with Ionela and the information that she'll provide, we'd like, together with Olesya, to tell a little bit about the work in addition to the hotline activity that we mentioned during the first meeting. That work, those activities, shelter activities, crisis room and crisis center activities, and work that we have in Ukraine and Belarus. Because we understand perfectly that the opportunity to provide this emergency residence, provide this emergency support, quick support, this is one of the most important services together with the hotline services. It should be there. It should be the component of interagency cooperation. Doesn't matter whether it's Ukraine, Romania, or Belarus. By the way, Ionela, I'm sure that she will tell you about how they do organize the working of these crisis rooms, shelters in Ukraine. How does it work? So, right now, just to leave more time for communication with Ionela, I'd like to come straight to the part. What basically is there? What services do we have here in Ukraine and in Belarus? And I'd like to pass the floor to Olesya Kompanets for Olesya to tell us a little bit in brief what do we have in Ukraine? Shelters, crisis rooms, state, public. How does it work in Ukraine? So Olesya, please. Thank you, Olga. Thank you so much. So in Ukraine, starting from 2016, we've started creating this quite huge extended network or system to provide services, specialized services for victims of domestic violence and GBV. And one of the most important roles in creation of the systems, this was the partnership with UNFPA, with the representatives of local authorities and national government. And during 2016 and up to now, we've created 9 specialized shelters for victims of domestic violence and 5 daycare centers with the support of the fund, with the support of the UNFPA. But what is the most important, the model that was used as one of the most efficient by the UNFPA, fully compliant with the national standards. It became an example, a model, a role model that was fixed at the national level in legislation with the relevant decree. And right now, so we have a decree on shelters for victims of domestic violence, and such shelters are being established by the representatives of local authorities all around Ukraine. And there is a huge interest and huge demand for these services provided by the shelters and daycare centers. And I'd like to give you a short presentation to share it which basically the presentation of services, what we actually do provide. First of all, why shelters are interesting. Shelters do provide safe stay, opportunities for a safe stay, and with a completely secret address up to 3 months. If, for example, there is a victim needs to stay longer in the shelter, so we can actually extend the duration of the stay up to 6 months, depending on the needs of any specific woman. So a victim gets complex psychosocial support, may get some legal consultations or some referrals to other experts, to other service providers if it's necessary, again, depending on the needs. In the shelter, victim stays together with minors, with small children, in comfortable conditions, in safe conditions, supported by psychologists, social workers, legal advisors, and this time of shelter stay for the victim, it's really critical. So for the person, it's important to understand how to live further, to make a certain plan, to understand what measures should be taken to start some new life, free and safe life, free from violence. Apart from shelters, UNFPA also organize some daycare centers, informational centers. The address again is open. It's public, and you can come anytime and get certain advice from the psychologists, from social workers, from lawyers, and understand where to go if a person suffered from domestic violence or other types of violence, and what to do if, for example, you are a witness. If you witnessed violence and you don't know what to do, how to act, what to advise your friends or relatives if they face this problem. So daycare centers, they're interesting also because they do combine a couple of services. Sometimes they are a part of the system, of the complex system of social services provision, and they're very important when it comes to referrals to other specialized service providers for victims. Taking into account the COVID pandemic, shelters continue functioning, and daycare centers as well. So they still take victims. They still continue providing support to victims, regardless of whether actually it doesn't matter where the person comes from. So the only condition that is that the only requirement, the only measure that was taken, basically the serious measure. Let's say more thorough medical examination, because you can get to into shelter only through a referral, so from the police, with a police request, a social service request, just to have a proper medical examination for the victim. First of all, we need to understand that there are no symptoms of COVID, that basically that this person, while staying at the shelter, no one else will be put in danger, all other shelter clients. So it's very important. Medical examination, taking into consideration the COVID conditions, it was really fast, and the police refers the clients also during the nighttime to specialized units of the polyclinics in hospitals to have this examination, basic examination, very fast, carried out very fast, and for the client to be supported, to be taken in the shelter as quick as she can. So also among the shelters, we distributed the basic protection equipment just to stop the dissemination of the COVID-19, and we also took measures to disinfect the premises according to international standards and recommendations of WHO. We try to comply to it, of course, and therefore in shelters they are functioning fully in full scope, and we cannot say that. We cannot say we had more victims referring for services, but speaking about daycare centers, we must say that there is some interesting change, some shift. What do I mean? We have more requests from victims to these information centers to get some consultations, to get some support. What is truly interesting, during the first month after the quarantine, was presented, так. Ой, вы меня выключили. So during the first month, and within the second month, we had 36% of increase of growth. So in general, so we can say that there was an increase in the number of victims, 67% of growth comparing to the pre-quarantine months. It was registered in mid-May, 2 months after the quarantine was established. And this growth is connected with the fact that, first of all, of course, we have more violence cases, unfortunately, and also the employees of daycare centers, social workers, and psychologists. So they also launched the online. So to extend the opportunities for people to request for help or for consultations. Also, the third reason for the growth is that there was a huge information campaign within the quarantine conditions, and we can say that there is more trust right now to specialized services, to specialized service providers. So, and this trend is gradual, step by step. It's growing gradually, and we register more cases comparing to the previous quarter, the last quarter of 2019. So we can say that Ukraine's population is more favorable to service providers, and they do request for help and consultations. So what is actually interesting about that? That quick response and adaptation of service provision by specialists in shelters and daycare centers in COVID conditions. We speak about the online services, phone calls, consulting within phone calls, Viber, Skype, use of these online tools made this service more accessible for more people who do require this help. And of course, now location basically does not matter. The distance does not matter. So it means that people everywhere can get these services right now. And the geographical barrier had been overcome. And the victims felt that they could actually get this support regardless of where they were. Anytime, practically anytime. 24 hours, 7 days a week. And it gives this feeling, this very important feeling and I'll be very glad to answer your questions. And right now a small video that will basically tell you about the activity of shelters and daycare centers in Ukraine for victims of domestic violence and GBV. So please, we can actually see it right now. So the shelter...
Притулок – це вузькоспеціалізована послуга для постраждалих від домашнього насильства, яка, окрім безпечного простору, передбачає отримання психосоціальної підтримки, первинної юридичної допомоги, інформаційної допомоги, перенаправлення до інших надавачів послуг. Такі притулки дозволяють постраждалим спланувати свої подальші кроки, щоб розпочати нове життя. У притулку жінка має можливість отримати безпечне і комфортне місце перебування, у тому числі з дітьми, комплексну соціальну та психологічну допомогу, доступ до життєво необхідних соціальних, медичних та юридичних послуг у населеному пункті, де розташований притулок, соціальний супровід, за потребою допомогу від інших фахівців, що здійснюється у тісній співпраці з фахівцями структурних підрозділів праці і соціальної політики, медичних закладів, підрозділів поліції. Типовий склад спеціалістів, які надають послуги у притулку: менеджер, керівник, чергові соціальні працівники – 4 особи, психолог. Особливості роботи – цілодобовий режим. Послуги надаються жінкам на безоплатній основі. Діяльність здійснюється без розголошення інформації про місцезнаходження і без розміщення вивіски на приміщенні, в якому знаходиться притулок. У 9 притулках, створених за підтримки UNFPA, фонду ООН у галузі народонаселення, отримали комплексні послуги та безпечний простір понад 1250 постраждалих, серед яких жінки та діти. Частина притулків вже отримала фінансування з місцевих бюджетів. За міжнародними стандартами, на кожні 10 тисяч населення має бути одне родинне місце в притулку.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening. And if you do have any questions, I will be really glad to answer them. Maybe after the expert presents her information. And I'll be really glad to provide any comments upon that. Thank you. Thank you, Alicia. Thank you. Truly very interesting, huge work done within these last years. And I understand that the key to success, I guess, is proper cooperation and interaction with the local authorities, with local self-governance bodies, as you mentioned it in the video, and communication with the colleagues in Ukraine, as far as I know. A lot is being funded, a huge share of the budget, it goes from local budgets, at local level. So if we talk about our country, about Belarus, we actually have a situation as quite similar, a little bit different, of course. Belarus, currently, in Belarus, we've created this network of special services, of special centers in each administrative district, so at district level, to provide social services. Territorial center for provision of social services to people. The structure is created at the expense of the budget, of the state budget, by local authorities. And today we have 146 of such centers in Belarus, and also 2 city centers of social services for families and children in Minsk and Gomel, big cities. And I'd like also to know that also the work. So what are the functions of these centers and their obligations? So to provide support to victims of domestic violence, and this whole package of services that is necessary, basic services that must be provided to victims. I think this is the analog of informational center, of daycare center that Alessia mentioned. So to provide this kind of social service of temporary sheltering, what we call, the shelter activity, for those people who suffered from domestic violence on the basis of centers, we create these crisis rooms, as we call it, and comparing it to such structures, territorial center that we have, which where people can come to get some support, to require certain consultations, get some information. This is a special place, and there is an address where people can refer to, all who need to get the support. So comparing with the territorial center, which do work with different categories of citizens that really do require some help because they undergo certain difficulties, the address of the crisis room is not provided to public, so it's confidential, as you mentioned in your presentation. So crisis room is a specially equipped premise where we created all necessary conditions also for the safe residence, for safe stay, and we can have adult citizens with their children. So women with their children, they can stay there. So the schedule of the crisis room, so 24 hours, 7 days a week, and the whole support, all the help that is provided, also provided free of charge, of course. So during the stay, so those people who actually stay in the crisis room, who live there, apart from the service of this temporary stay, emergency stay specialists of territorial centers of social services, they provide this full package of necessary support. So basically psychological consultations, social support, and case management, as we call it, So interaction and referral to other specialists at local level. This is the kind of work that goes together with this safe stay in crisis room. So all victims can get it. And as I mentioned, it's free of charge, again, 100%. Also, apart from that, if there is a need, if there is a need to get some extra support, humanitarian support, food, for example, a woman, let's say, like she had to flee from her apartment or her house just to run away, basically, and she has no money to buy food and some other vital goods. So the employees of the center, the territorial center of social services provision, they can help this woman by referring to other organizations, Red Cross, other NGOs, actually, to get this additional help, together with the safe stay and consultations that the center is responsible for. So today, the duration of stay in crisis room, it's not fixed. It's not defined by a certain limit. So basically, it depends on the situation, individual situation, and we do understand that there is a certain period of time for a victim to solve the problem, to get out of this difficult situation, because every woman has a very specific situation, and that's how we define the duration of stay. So we can say that the needs of the victim, they are in the focus. The needs of clients, this is the basic condition. So when we actually try to calculate how much resource do we need for the person. So up to January 1st, 2020, according to the data of the Ministry of Labor and Social Protection of Belarus, we have 136 crisis rooms. It means that in many districts of our country, apart from territorial center of social services, we also have this crisis room in each district. And we need to understand that as a rule, this is just a separate premise. Its address is confidential, and to keep everything as much convenient for people and safe as it should be, to provide professional support. So just what I want to note, for us, I guess it's very important that the Territorial Center of Social Services and such service as temporary stay on the basis of crisis room, it's very important to make it a part of this general umbrella mechanism, umbrella approach, interagency cooperation approach, referral approach, and interagency council work at local level. And I'm sure that Ionela today will tell us that this interagency interaction, referral, and combination of services, this is one of the most important components of this comprehensive process in this area. So what I'd like to note as a disadvantage of those crisis rooms, what is a disadvantage? So the biggest difficulty is that these centers, these crisis rooms, are specialized, let's say, yes? So the services can be provided to citizens who actually find themselves in some difficult situations, including the victims of domestic violence. And apart from that, we also have a number of categories who do have right to use these crisis rooms. So also, together with the victims of domestic violence, human trafficking victims as well, and people who suffered from disasters, natural disasters, anthropogenic disasters, and also orphans, and children deprived of parental care. So I'd like to note as well that according to the data of Ministry of Labor and Social Policy of Belarus, almost more than 50% of those who stayed in crisis rooms in 2019, approximately 60%, we've had mostly persons who suffered from domestic violence. But still, again, I'd like to repeat that. The biggest difficulty with this type of work is that this service is not specialized. And the support is provided to other citizens who find themselves in difficult situations. Still, it should be mentioned that this work is organized at the level of local communities, funded at the expense of state budget. Local budget, therefore, this is a huge contribution from the state, from local authorities. They do contribute to that. Apart from these crisis rooms, except of these in territorial centers that I mentioned, which are organized at, which are supported by the state, supported at the state level, I'd like to say that in Belarus we also have a number of specialized shelters who do function that are administered by the NGOs. Today in Belarus, we have a couple of these shelters. So shelter in Minsk, Radislava, also a network of shelters, SOS Children's Villages, a couple of shelters that are administered by this organization. And also a few months ago, we also have two new shelters opened in Borisov and Pinsk towns, and these are opened just for a small period of time, just to somehow diminish the consequences of COVID, to provide support to services, provide support to victims who can suffer from the escalation of domestic violence, taking into account the COVID influence. So these shelters administered by NGOs, these are specialized, and they provide complex support and help to, so we speak about the safe stay and consulting, and psychological consulting as well, legal aid if necessary, just to the victims of domestic violence. So, respectively, we can say that the model of work of such specialized shelters, this is the example, this is the role models. For example, in Belarus, we try to organize trainings, seminars, workshops, meetings, just to exchange experience or practices. For the specialists, for example, who do work in crisis rooms, in territorial centers of social services, if the victims are not the only category they do work with, to get the best practices that NGOs do have, that specialized shelters provide, to accumulate it, to actually disseminate these practices, and for the specialists of state social facilities actually to use it as well. Of course, there's always something to improve, and I do think that it would be really interesting to get Ukrainian experience, know more about this, and for us I think this is really important. Maybe how it's organized in Ukraine, where is the balance when you speak about the local resources and NGOs that quite often provide some specialized services, and they provide really valuable experience, and how to enhance this exchange of practices to get the best services, efficient services, to get effective help, productive help, and to actually take another step and become closer to the international standards of providing support to victims of domestic violence. Right now, I'd like to finish my presentation, my small presentation, and I think I would join the section of questions and answers. I would really be glad to answer all the questions that we'll get from Ukrainian colleagues, Belarusian colleagues, after the presentation of our key expert, Ionela Horga. Right now, she will present us the Romanian experience, how they do work in this area. Ionela, good afternoon. Good afternoon. On behalf of Ukrainian and Belarusian colleagues, you're warmly welcome today. So I will repeat what I told you at the very beginning. I do think that many of those who listen to us today, they took part in seminars, I think, and in these visits, study tours, where you were presented as expert, maybe you organized these. Ionela, please tell us about the experience, about the practice. How do you work with the domestic violence issues that you have in Romania? This complex approach and this interagency mechanism that you do have, a truly popular Romanian model. And the second question is, how did COVID how did it influence the work that was organized? And how do you think personally? Some new forms or methods of work. Would you like to take it in your future activities if you see that these are efficient, important, useful? Ionela, so the floor is yours, please.
Sorry, Yanela, we do not hear you. Could you please switch on microphone?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, now it's
You
fine.
didn't. Okay. Okay. So I will start from the beginning.
Yeah.
What what I said is that along with the disruption and instability, the COVID pandemic brought a powerful transformative force that drove changes, and we have had and still have to rethink the way we are communicating, work, and live overall. Stress, the disruption of social and protective networks, and the decreased access to services all exacerbated the risk of violence for women. As distancing measures were put in place and people were asked to stay at home, along with lack of physical access to services, the risk of intimate partner violence increased. The lockdown in Romania brought to the fore the discussion of GBV response and domestic violence in particular because of the isolation. The number of reported cases grew, and service providers indicate that they need new guidance on how to adapt operation in the context of COVID pandemic. In the current COVID context, the mode of delivery of domestic violence essential services is critical to ensure the continuity of quality services and ensure that no one is left behind. So before talking about the way of providing services to the survivors, I would like very brief to make an introduction on the types of services that we are providing here. In times of restricted mobility, distance, insecurity, or other obstacles, two types of services must be available along with the static ones. And here I am talking about mobile and remote services. Mobile domestic violence services aim to meet the needs and demands of the survivors or any person at risk of domestic violence who cannot access static services. And during lockdown, we already know that there were a lot of barriers in accessing static services. Mobile service providers, they go on the sites where the population and the survivors are located. But we all know that mobile services cannot substitute the static ones on one hand, and on the other hand, the mobile services are very much limited in time. So they cannot allow the provision of comprehensive case management, psychological support, and comprehensive referral services. And additionally to this, mobile services may have human and financial costs higher than static services, which can be difficult to sustain and implement. And as an immediate reaction to lockdown and COVID context, there was no time to identify and mobilize funds to sustain such kind of services. Therefore, rather than mobile services, we concentrated more in adapting the specialized services on a remote basis and ensure the access to shelter when is needed. Remote services aim to provide mainly psychosocial support and comprehensive case management over a technology platform. Either we are talking about hotline, telephone line, chat apps, or even SMS sometimes, rather than face-in-face in person. Remote services were provided under different forms. So there were three ways to provide remote services to the survivors. A standalone intervention, when the survivor cannot access static services in person due to mobility restriction and the sheltering is now needed. In these cases, actually, the survivors were the one who contact the services that we are providing remotely, but the decision not to have the interaction with these survivors is made based on the case evaluation and risk assessment, which is a very, very critical step in our intervention. The second way to provide remote support was along with static services. In these cases, actually the staff was in contact with the survivors, mediated, this is the word, mediated by our partner, mainly by the police. So the police, somehow we can consider they were providing mobile services. They were present in the community, and when they identify a case, a survivor, immediately they contact our service, and we provided remote support to the survivor. And as I already said, actually this is the way of complementing mobile support, because during the lockdown, the police played a crucial role in being present in the communities and protecting the survivors. Often the police workers called the staff to provide remote support to the survivors. All these types of services, mobile, remote, and static, they required, due to COVID context, new protocols to be developed and to ensure the continuation of providing services during the lockdown and after. And these protocols did not replace the usual already used standard operating procedures and guidelines in providing care and services for domestic violence survivors. The new measures actually are temporary and only complement the existing procedures and guidelines in order to better respond to the unique situation of COVID pandemic and lockdown. And now I will very brief, because the time limitations. I will very brief talk about how we ensured specific services for domestic violence survivors, and I will refer here to crisis center, what you are calling daycare centers, through the shelter, and also in a multi-sectoral network. Within the daycare center, the face-to-face support is reduced at minimum, except the critical cases. Remote psychological, social support and referral are provided as much as possible through hotline chat apps and SMS. I already said this. Depending on the particularities of each case and of course, depending on technical options of the survivors. Legal support is available only when a request for new protection order is made, and this is especially because the courts are closed during this emergency and now alert period of time. Taking into account the legal limitations and the potential forced isolation or seizure of the survivor, the only way to offer support is when the survivor contacts us or any other service, or when the police patrol is in the neighbor. When we are communicating remotely, here I will talk a little bit about safety of the communication, because as I said, the remote support is provided through communication tools. Service-owned devices and accounts were provided to our staff. So our staff is not using their personal mobile phones or tools to communicate with the survivors, because we know that there could be I don't know, privacy or safety breakdowns. We already know this. And we developed like a checklist on how to use mobile devices and laptops by our staff. Not to use personal device for work purpose, not to mingle personal and professional data on the devices, particularly if professional data includes survivors' information. Put a passcode on the device, install security updates, and download anti-malware protection. Actually, this was installed in all devices. Review the privacy and security settings on the device and in each app. Not to use public Wi-Fi if accessing client information. We paid attention on sharing information and collecting information on cases, because now we do not have direct access to our management information system. Instead of that, we secure the network through a VPN to connect with the office, and we are sharing the files using a secure cloud-based file sharing system. And the last but not the least, the staff is required to download only apps that are necessary for work. On the other hand, when it comes to communication security, the survivors were also suggested to delete history logs, text history logs, for example, send and received messages, as well as the service number from their text log. The staff asked the survivor to assess if it's safe to keep the worker's name and phone number in their contacts, and if an abusive person is monitoring the survivor's phone, for example, either because he has physical access to the phone or can monitor it remotely, it might not be safe for the survivor to store those details in their contacts. And also, we are asking them to call back whenever they feel they need our support, because our rules is not to contact from our side to the survivor. We are not calling the survivors, not to put them in danger. The focus actually, as I already mentioned before, the focus in our remote services was on safety planning, risk assessment and safety planning. This is very important because during the lockdown, the option for the survivor to fly out from the house with their children from a situation before the violence begins or during a violent incident was very limited. According to military ordinance, during the lockdown, the population was forbidden to step out from their houses. And there were only limited reasons to do this, to go to workplace, buy subsistence products, or um, I don't know, do physical exercises, but everything in a very limited area in the proximity of the residence. And we ensured the survivors that actually we have the exception from these rules when they need to ask for support from the police or any other service providers. The risk was assessed in each case, in particular the risk posed to survivors of domestic violence and their children by increased time at home. For example, if they are working or not, the time at work is increasing or decreasing. Increased proximity to the perpetrator. Again, it was important to know that if the perpetrator is working or not. Increased emotional and financial stress, because we know that a lot of companies they closed down, unfortunately, because of this COVID context, and a lot of people they lost their incomes or the incomes were reduced. In many cases, because of the isolation, but not only, the support from family was reduced, the big family was reduced, and also sometimes we found out increased risk of debilitating illness because of the, again, limited access to healthcare services. And based on this risk assessment, our staff, my colleagues, they provided all the time key messages to the survivor to increase their safety, to be aware of anything. The abuser can use a weapon, for example, while they are staying in the house. If possible, they should try to keep out of way any sharp of or heavy objects that can be used as a weapon. We ask them to stay in safer places in their home, so to avoid kitchen, for example. Try not to wear scarves or long jewelries that can be used to strangle. Um, if there is no way to escape the violence at the moment, to make sure that they are becoming a small target, we are calling it. So dive into a corner and curl up into a ball, protecting their face, and put arms around each side of the head, wrapping fingers together just to protect the head. If the abuser does start to harm the adult, the survivors, we recommend not to run where the children are, because the abuser can hurt them too. When it comes to children, we are recommending to create a plan with them, to tell them what to do in case of violence. If I don't know, to call 911, 112, for example, the emergency number, to tell to someone outside the house about the violent situation. But they have to ensure that the children knows that their first priority is to stay safe, not to physically protect the survivor. This is very important. And also, even during the lockdown, we recommend the survivors as well to think to several reasons for leaving the house in the limit of military ordinance at different times of the day that the abuser will be leave in case the survivor feel that the violence is about to erupt, and that could be the chance to ask for help. So this is very brief when it comes to crisis center or daycare center. When we are talking about shelter, the services were adapted to the lockdown condition, but also we paid attention to infection spread risk and limitation. The support provided was focused mainly on safety, psychosocial support, and organizing the stay in the shelter. No legal advice was provided, while the shelter persons do not need a protection order during the stay. And as I said, because the courts are off duty during the emergency plus the alert period. The healthcare was provided through telemedicine when was needed. According to quality standards, we have here in Romania, and also according to quality standards, actually even before COVID, one person was requested to be 24/7 present at the shelter. I mean, one professional, one staff member. According to the military ordinance during the lockdown, we were requested to be quarantined in the shelter for 14 days, and these days were followed by 14 days of self-isolation at home. So all the time, 2 staff members were quarantined in the shelter, and they were replaced by other 2 after 14 days. The staff that was staying in the shelter and had to interact with the persons that were admitted in the shelter, for example, they had access to complete protection equipment, which means gloves, FFP2 mask, face shield, and gowns. So we provided the entire set of protection equipment for the staff. The survivors were not allowed to leave the shelter under any circumstances according to military ordinance, but this was not difficult to be done because no resident of the shelter was working at the time. The supply of basic products and food was made by the social worker that is not quarantined for 14 days inside the shelter, but on the other hand, we were very lucky because some local private initiatives, in particular 2 restaurants, they knew about the shelter. They asked us if we are continuing providing services for the survivors, and they decided to provide us 1 restaurant, 1 meal per day for each survivor that were admitted in the shelter at lunch, and the other restaurant provided the dinners for the survivors, plus our staff who was staying in the shelter, which was a really great support for our shelter. The shelter continued to function following the national quality standards enforced before the COVID outbreak, and the news in shelter functioning was linked only to limitation of infection hazard or reaction if any infection occurs. And of course, we had also procedures to prevent COVID infection or to limit if the infection happened. At the admission, we had the strict procedures for admitting a survivor into the shelter, isolating them in a dedicated space for 14 days, plus testing them before being isolated in the premises of the shelter. As a general measures, during the stay in the shelter, all living rooms, bathrooms, and common places, as kitchen, for example, have disposable with hand sanitizers, antibacterial soap, or disinfectants. The residents do not use the common zones as kitchen, bathroom, living in the same time, or to keep as much as possible a distance of at least 1.5 meters from each other and stuff. And after using any room or appliance, they had to disinfect all items used. All surfaces were and still are disinfected at least 3 times in a day, and we are using professional disinfectants according to quality standards. And again, I want to say that we used all the professional disinfectants even before the COVID outbreak, but now we are using them more often. At the shelter entrance and in all rooms, rugs soaked in disinfectants are placed. The residents are constantly informed and compliance checked about the infection prevention rules. And of course, we have detailed procedure if COVID infection signs or symptoms appear, and also were also developed following the national regulations and procedures, where to announce, what to do, how what institution to call and come to take that person from the shelter, and so on. But more than talking about the procedures, because maybe these are on one hand universal, but also specific to each country, I would like to talk, because I know that the ultimate purpose of providing services for domestic violence survivors is their safety. But in the same time, we cannot forget about human resources, about staff that is working to provide those services. So we understood that during COVID crisis, shelter staff have rights and obligations. According to military ordinance, we had very strict rules. Um, no staff member could resign, for example, during the lockdown. If a request was coming during that period of time, was considered a criminal offense, and it was postponed until the alert period of time is going to be end. So we had the lockdown for 2 months, and now we are still in the alert period of time until 15th of July, so 1 month from now, and still we have restrictions and limitations in what we can do. As I mentioned, the shelter staff is reduced, and they are working in shifts, so there are fewer people in the building to limit the interaction even between the staff members. Being quarantined in the shelter for 14 days is not easy, even for the staff. It is stressful, and basic needs can be affected. Therefore, we'll try as much as possible to fulfill the needs, at least the basic needs in the Maslow pyramid. So separate rooms were arranged for staff members, including hygiene equipment, full access to internet connection, to be in contact with family members, TV programs, radio broadcasts were secured. Also, as I said, that adequate nutritious meal were provided on a daily schedule from our partners. After relaxing the measures, and no staff quarantine is imposed anymore now after the lockdown, the working week was shortened to 3 working days. to reduce the mobility and risk. And the last but not the least, this is very important as well, the staff was compensated with day offs and financial bonuses. So these were the two specialized services I said at the beginning I will talk about, daycare, crisis center, and shelter. And now I would like very brief to talk a little bit about multi-sectoral network and how we are working with the other partners, because we were not able due to limited mobility to go in the community or for the survivors to come to us. A lot of workload was in the shoulders of two main partners. One is health sector and the other is represented by the police, because the multi-sectoral response to domestic violence as we knew it before COVID changed a lot. So health facilities and professionals, they continued to identify the survivors and to provide them with the information about services available locally. I mean here daycare center, the possibility to call us, to contact us, to ask for psychosocial support, and also about the shelter, including opening hours, contact details were provided, and if those services can be offered remotely. And in many cases, the health professionals, they established even referral links with our staff. Police, as I said, they play a crucial role in identifying the survivors and providing immediate support for safety support for them. And an important element was to provide them immediately with referral information, which means telephone numbers, contact details, where to ask for support. This was one. But the main role that police was playing during the COVID lockdown, because they were present in the communities, was in prevention and awareness raising of the population about domestic violence, about the possible consequences of lockdown due to COVID pandemic and so on. So they were actually the ones that visit the neighbors, talking with the survivors, ensuring their safety, and also making this connection between the survivor and specialized services. All partners active in prevention and response to domestic violence encourage the survivors to report a violent incident, calling the emergency number 112 here, or our hotline, or contacting the police worker directly, which was present in the community. Although the mobility was restricted, an exception, as I said, to movement restriction for reporting of violence specifically was made after the government understood about the risk of domestic violence that increased due to the lockdown and isolation. Another component very important in multi-sectoral response here in our region is the community-based support. And again, because of the isolation, this was very much limited, and we already know that most of the community mobilization actions and tools like personal actions, campaigns, contests, information booths, community events, and so on, that worked before lockdown were not no longer active. Therefore, the community members, they had to be aware of the increased risk of violence during the pandemic and the need to keep in touch and support persons subject of violence, and to have information about where to help, where help for survivor is available. And it's important to ensure that it is safe to connect with women when the abuser is present in the home. And in most of the cases, the community members that are present all the time in the surroundings, they know better when the abuser is out, and they can contact the victim. Um, what can I say? I think that the COVID pandemic is not ended. Even we see around us a relaxation, which is not realistic one. I can tell you that for the last 2 weeks, we already have a relaxation here in Romania. We consider that the peak of the COVID infection was already gone, which can be not true, because we can see for the last 3 days that the number of identified new cases is increasing, and we don't know what is going to happen. Therefore, we decided not to change anything in the procedures that we are implementing in our services. We are continuing by providing remote psychosocial support and case management support, plus the shelter in the conditions of limiting or preventing COVID infections, because the effects of violence, we know that are very often long-lived. Violence in all its forms can have an impact on our life through the rest of our life. This is unacceptable, and the risk of violence that we all face during the current COVID crisis cannot be ignored. So we cannot ignore violence, but on the other hand, we cannot ignore COVID. And we decided that at least until the end of this year, the new procedures complementing the old procedures and guidelines to be in place when we are providing services for the survivors. So this is the presentation of the how we are providing services during this new challenge for all of us, and I am very open to any question you have for me.
Спасибо, Ionela.
Thank you, Ionela. Thank you so much. Truly quite an interesting presentation. It's really interesting. And for example, for our country, for Belarus, we did not have any restrictions. So we did not have this quarantine, lockdown, as you know, all these restrictions when it comes to like you have certain restrictions concerning mobility for all the population. I think it would be really interesting because, frankly speaking, the most important thing that we always talk about is that services should not stop functioning. They should be there, and it's really, really crucial not just to have this online format, online services like chatbot, hotline that we mentioned during the first meeting, not to have this available, but also this opportunity to stay at shelter. Because I'll just add, maybe I did not mention it in my presentation, in Belarus, we did not stop functioning. Territorial centers, they continue to work. Specialists in the centers, crisis rooms, they worked as well. So just like in Ukraine, just like in Romania, it was really very important for us to keep the process ongoing, to organize it in such way for the people to ensure the stay of survivors, of women who survived the violence, and for the specialists, for the personnel actually to make it safe. Also, individual protection gear, individual protection equipment, and the procedures and instructions and the guidelines, disinfection taking place regularly. Social distancing, of course, it's really important. Of course, we did not have lockdown, as I mentioned, and no restrictions, but it was really important. Alessia, maybe something to add before... I maybe would announce that our specialists can start writing questions in chat if they do want. Questions may be to Yanela, maybe you can give it to me or to Alessia, I don't know. Up to you. So right now you're thinking about the question, so please, Alessia, maybe you'd like to add something. Thank you so much. Thank you, Yanela. Thank you. Olga, I just want to say that...
Был очень интересен для Украины, и мы неоднократно обращались, поддерживали сотрудничество и поддерживаем сотрудничество с Ионеллой, как представительницей Института, Восточноевропейского института репродуктивного здоровья, с которым мы длительное время уже сотрудничаем и очень ценим это. Опыт Румынии всегда был интересен как в сфере создания услуг, так особенно в налаживании и эффективной мультисекторального взаимодействия, мультисекторального сотрудничества всех лиц, которые участвуют в...
Stakeholders who are involved in provision of services and basically who respond to any incidents, any cases of domestic violence. I should note that Yanela also underlined the importance of multi-sectoral cooperation and to launch it in the crisis conditions, it's really hard if before that all services, all the stakeholders of the process, if they did not actively cooperate, if it wasn't present there. So, of course, right now we all have these conditions, we all have this environment. It's truly important. It's a huge demand. It's a huge need. And I really want us all, so please do not expect for any crisis to emerge. If you really so don't look for difficulties, okay? Don't look for disasters. If you want to improve something, prepare it beforehand, and this is the precondition for efficiency. Later, to respond efficiently to any crisis situations, you need to have an already developed system, already developed network. So what I want to note, as Ionela mentioned, Romania revised the algorithm. Romania revised those referral mechanisms within the COVID crisis, within the lockdown period. So we do understand that right now this context it requires revision in Ukraine as well. Of course, we need to understand how to change the algorithm of referral, and we need to be very open to what? So, firstly, certain mechanisms, certain decisions, certain solutions, they may be efficient and useful. They'll be so useful and efficient, we will even leave it after COVID finishes and after it diminishes. And something that was, let's say, taken as standard or normal before COVID, something will be actually forgotten because it will lose its efficiency, because it will not meet the demands, it will not meet the requirements. But this experience, the lessons learned, and we still continue to learn. We need to analyze it properly, thoroughly, to, let's say, digest it and take only the best, something that meets our demands, to provide the high quality services for people. So the experience that we share right now, I think this is one of the first steps for us to define the lessons. So what actually works? What actually can we take and use in our further activity when we plan our activity in cooperation? So, Yanela, thank you again. Huge gratitude to you. So I have a question, or maybe I'd like all our participants, maybe, yes, Alessia, do you see any questions? Because I don't see any questions, I'm sorry. So far, I think all our participants are quite modest. Maybe they are still thinking. Please, I'd like to remind you they can leave your questions not only right now in this YouTube stream. If you watch us on YouTube, please take a closer look at your chat room on the right side. Or maybe in Facebook, you can do it as well. So please, leave anything in comments, all your questions. This is a wonderful opportunity to ask Yanela a question, get more information about Romanian practices. Olga and me, we are also ready to answer your questions. So do please Alesia, I think that our colleagues are still thinking. I have a question. Okay, I'll be the first one. So, Yanela, question goes to you. Yanela, you told a lot of information, useful information. This interesting initiative from 2 restaurants that actually took this responsibility, made a decision to help just organize the food, dinners and lunches for the clients of shelter. So please tell me, maybe, so as a rule, we always understand that in Belarus it works, that such situations, such crisis situations, they quite often actually help people to show their best qualities, their best features. Actually, the people show solidarity, express solidarity, and maybe some companies, private companies and entities, apart from restaurants, they decided maybe somehow to help. I do understand very well that this is really a difficult time for small and medium-sized enterprises. I think in all countries right now it's really difficult. Almost everywhere we have many businesses that were unfortunately destroyed because they lost the opportunity, they lost their client base. But maybe some other interesting examples apart from restaurants. I can actually tell that this is really a great initiative, and yeah, and it truly provided a solution for one of the most important problems, crucial problems that was there for those women, children who stay at shelters. I just think that maybe we need a small technical switch because Yanela will speak in English and the stream will be in Russian. I think a couple of seconds for the re-switch. Yanela, please do share maybe some other practices just similar to this restaurant initiative, cooperation with business. Maybe something was there.
Thank you so much for the question. I gave the example of the restaurants because that was very important for us to limit actually the necessity to go out from the shelter, but was not the only one. For example, the other companies, they provided with diapers because we had 2 small children in the shelter. Also, another company decided to provide basic food, let's call it like this, milk, because we need a lot of milk, flour, meat, all sort of stuff they had, and they are very useful for the survivors. And I have to say that there were a lot of calls from different companies or persons actually, because even the calls from the companies are personal reactions, initiatives. So we have to admit this. And a lot of them, they called and asked, what do you need? But you know that we had to limit the interaction. On one hand, we had to limit the mobility, not only ours, but theirs as well. If you remember, I told that during the lockdown, for example, we were very much limited to go out. People asked over 65, for example, they were allowed to work, to get out from their houses only for 2 hours. So our mobility was very, very much limited. You had to have in your hand a paper, signed paper, date it, saying the reason why you are on the street, for example, either if you are walking or going by car. So it was very difficult to have this interaction, and we decided to use only those initiatives that were easy to be explained on one hand, and not to put in the risk the persons involved. And I would like to mention one more thing about, because you mentioned the necessity to continue providing services during an emergency, and in particular during COVID. Our government from the very beginning I would not say they thought about domestic violence, but about social needs in general. And from the very beginning of the lockdown, one of the military ordinance decision was not to be able to shut down any kind of social service. It was forbidden by the law. So, despite any difficulties, you had to keep providing services through the shelter and daycare center. This was on one hand. On the other hand, also government decided at national level to have an awareness raising campaign to talk about domestic violence and what are the first steps to be done by the survivors of domestic violence. This was also very useful for us. So we all of us, we understood that we have to continue to provide this kind of support, especially when it comes to the ones that were in contact with the survivors. It was obvious for police officers that they do not have only to check the people on the street for that declaration of for the reason of being on the street, but also they kept continue to provide support to the survivor, and it was the same with the healthcare providers and so on. So we tried as much as possible to continue our work with compliance to the new conditions of COVID.
So we do have a question right now from the Facebook. Ianella, to you again. So the question is this. Yes, Alessia wants to say something or not? And I have another question. So finally we have questions emerging very well. So the question is this. So Ianella told that especially for those people who, for the survivors who are at home, and if they communicate with a specialist, one of the services or one of the ways to communicate or interact is to create this plan, safety plan, how to stay at home safely if the violence escalates. And the question is this: so who usually helps to create this plan? I think someone from the specialists that work, someone from the experts. And do you help to implement the plan? Or it's just a plan, or the survivor herself or himself, they decide what to do with the plan. So what is your intervention?
The question, actually, the risk assessment and safety planning was implemented as always. In implementing the safety planning, 3 major actors are involved usually. One is the specialist working at the crisis daycare center, which is evaluating the case, evaluating the risk, and develop this safety planning. The second is the police officer. As I told you, we are working very, very close with them, and they are the ones who are checking for the safety of the survivor time to time. And the third actor, which is very important, is the survivor. You can build up any safety plan if the survivor does not understand the risk posed by violence and they do not comply to the safety planning measures, is useless. So, and that's why, for example, for us, the role of police officers was very important because they were in the situation to be able to reassess the risk time to time when they monitored the cases in the community. They also remind the survivors about the safety measures, and they were with us, of course, but they were the ones who time to time remind the survivors about the importance to follow the safety planning measures. So it's not only the task of the professional who is working remotely at the end of the telephone, but we are using the network, the multi-sectoral network in which we are part, and also we are emphasizing the role of the survivor, which is the ultimate key in this.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. So we have a question from the Facebook as well. I think Ukrainian office, that is. So we have two questions. So the first question is, did you have any cases in Romania when specialized services, shelters stopped working during COVID? This question went before Ionela told us that according to Romanian legislation, all services were obliged to continue their functioning. So I think that was the answer to the question, but maybe Ionela will clarify if she wants. And second question, so your experience of working with aggressors. So what restrictions, what punishment, what measures are taken to work with aggressors in Romania, to affect aggressors? Ionela, again, the floor is yours. So we'll really be grateful for your answers.
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. So I already mentioned about the impossibility actually to close services for the survivors. But on the other hand, of course, we are realistic, and there were cases in which private initiatives, private shelters, especially when we talk about NGOs, they had the financial, especially difficulties in maintaining the services. The help was again from the state, because the state decided to offer subsidies for different initiatives. They offer subsidies for companies, for profit companies. They offer subsidies for non-profit initiatives like shelters. So the continuation of providing services, it was actually understood by the government to be insured uh, when was needed. We were not in this situation because our services are entirely funded from the state budget. So 100% the services were funded continuously. There was no shortage in funding in providing services, so we did not have this issue. When it comes to aggressors, actually here we limited at zero our work with them. We concentrated because we already had to reduce the number of staff involved in providing services, and we decided to concentrate on survivors' needs. And the survivors, the perpetrators was the let's say task of police officers. They were in charge to talk with them, to do all the prevention discussions, measures. The police officers in Romania, they can issue temporary protection orders. So this was the decision, not to put any effort and time in working with them.
Спасибо большое, Янелла, за...
For your answers. So, Alessia, I think that we need, I guess, to come to an end of this meeting or discussion. So, we have no questions at YouTube, either at Facebook. And it's very well that we finish with this question. Whether do you work with aggressors, with the perpetrators? Because I'm really glad to announce the topic of our next online meeting that we will hold next Thursday. And the topic is the experience of organization of work with the aggressors, with perpetrators in Belarus and Ukraine. We will share our experience on how we work, what we actually do at national level in Belarus, in Ukraine. We'll talk about this aspect of our activity. So I'd like to note that such specific issues as activity of services within COVID context, shelters and hotlines. So we actually can terminate our focus, so we stop focusing on that. But next time, if we mention our activities on how we interact with the aggressors, we will also touch upon this aspect. I mean the COVID context, but of course we'll concentrate more on organization of our activity in general. The short-term and long-term perspective. That's why I invite you all to join us, to join our meeting next Thursday. So the same schedule from 3 p.m. up to 4:30 p.m. So Minsk and Kyiv time, that is. Be careful. And also I'd like to tell you that today or tomorrow we will launch the record of our first meeting, our first webinar, let's say to expand the satisfaction from our communication with our experts regarding this topic. So I want you all to have a very nice evening today, nice weekend, and dear ladies and gentlemen, let's meet next Thursday. And of course I pass the floor to Alessia. Couple of words maybe on behalf of our Ukrainian UNFPA office, please. Thank you so much, Olga. Thank you. I want you all to join us. Please do register for our next meetings. Oля already announced that next meeting will be dedicated to organization of work, how we interact with aggressors or perpetrators. This will be the third meeting. Another 3 meetings will be dedicated to other topics, organization of work with or provision of support and preventing any kind of violence against people with disabilities, then informational campaigns, and also cooperating with business in the framework of initiatives on counteracting and preventing violence. So how to interact with business. So this is the short announcement of all our next meetings. It would be really interesting. Please do register, join us, ask questions, be active, and get some very interesting insights from experts. We are looking forward to meet you all next Thursday. Thank you for staying with us. Have a nice evening as well.